Okay, good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Ormond Beach, a welcoming community of compassion and acceptance. I am the Reverend Kathy Ricky, and I invite you to our virtual service this morning. The in-person discussion group and worship services usually held in our building have been suspended until further notice. We will continue. We will hold discussion group at 9:15 and worship at 10:30 a.m. every Sunday on Zoom until it is safe to hold large group functions again in our building. Today, the Reverend Tracy Barrett is our guest speaker. She is the Minister of Ritual and Liturgy of Soul Fire, a Unitarian Universalist ministry. Today, Reverend Tracy's sermon is Come Back to the Well. Our co-hosts for this Zoom service are Rita Sheeler and Ludi Goodson, and yours truly is the service leader. If you are joining us for the first time this morning, we extend a special welcome to you. We invite you to stay on the Zoom meeting after the service concludes, when many of us engage in a bit of conversation with each other. We would enjoy meeting you if you'd like to introduce yourself. We also invite you to see our website at uuormond.info and look for the About Us tab. There you will find how to get further connected with our congregation and learn more about Unitarian Universalism and our congregation. Now on to announcements for the good of the community. Our building remains closed to most activities. We must follow CDC guidelines. If you have to be in the building, please wear a mask, practice social distancing, keep surfaces clean, and wash your hands frequently. If you need it, there's hand sanitizer in the kitchen. We have a related announcement about COVID vaccines. Now that the age limit has dropped in Florida, there may be more of you who need to know the best ways to apply. So our member, Gaia Davies, is glad to help you with that. Contact her if you need help. We also have many of our events on Zoom, and you can find the links for these virtual Zoom meetings in our weekly e-news, our monthly jotter, and our new website, uuormond.info. Upcoming, we have tomorrow, April 12th, the Zoom lunch with me from noon to 1 p.m. On Tuesday, April 13th at 6:30 p.m., Michael Kane hosts his meditation group. And then on April 22nd at 4:30 p.m., Cliff Jackson hosts his spiritual growth program. Please remember to schedule all events through our administrator, Kathy Jackson, including any times you think you need to be in the building. Her contact information is posted in our e-news and jotter. And the African American Cultural Society is doing a lottery as a fundraiser for its 30-year anniversary. First prize is $1,000. Second is $500, third $250, and fourth is $125. The drawing will be on October 23rd. You can buy a booklet of 10 potential winning tickets for $20 or single tickets for $3 each. Contact Reinhold Schlieper for how to purchase those tickets. The Alliance has committed to be an angel to Family Renew. This means a pledge of $350 per year for 3 years. There are many ways for us as individuals to support Family Renew. I give monthly. If you would like to follow the Alliance's example here, please go to the Family Renew website for how you can support this worthy organization with your time, your talent, or your treasure. In the absence of a physical passing of the offering basket at this time, we appreciate your continued financial support by emailing your checks for pledges and donations to our church address at 56 North Halifax, Ormond Beach 32176.
From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and from this we live.
At the sound of the singing bowl, our service begins. Our call to worship this morning, the words of Lao Tzu. Before creation, a presence existed, self-contained, complete, formless, voiceless, mateless, changeless, which yet pervaded itself with an unending motherhood. Though there can be no name for it, I have called it the way of life. Perhaps I should have called it the fullness of life, since fullness implies widening into space, implies still further widening, implies widening until the circle is whole. I invite you to light a chalice at home if you have one nearby. May we be reminded here of our highest aspirations and inspired to bring our gifts of love and service to the altar of humanity. May we know once again that we are not isolated beings, but connected in mystery and miracle to the universe, to this community, and to each other. And now, if you would like to recite with me our congregational covenant. Love is the spirit of our congregation, and service is our aim. To dwell together in peace and freedom, to seek the truth and to help one another. These are our goals. We have one concern this morning. Arden and Marilyn Doctor have some health problems. Cheer them up by sending them cards or emails. You can find their contact information in the directory. It's available that Kathy Jackson has recently sent out to all members. And our prayer for all those joys and concerns which remain silent and on our hearts this morning. Let us open our minds and hearts to a place of quiet, to the silent prayer for the healing of pain and the soft, gentle coming of love. Amen. Please join in listening and singing along as you wish to this a cappella arrangement of The Lone Wild Bird. The singers Courtney, Anne Louise, and Christina, who call themselves the Honey Whiskey Trio, gave us permission to share this video with you today. And please remember to keep your computer sound on mute if you wish to sing along.
The lone wild bird in lofty flight is still with you, nor leaves your side, and I am yours, I rest in you. that thought is known to thee, my whole life's path, whate'er it be, and I am yours, I rest in you. Oh, wondrous love, rest in me too, rest in me too. The ends of earth stretch far and wide, through dark and sea, unto thee, my whole life's path, whate'er it be, and I am yours, I rest in you. Oh, wondrous love, rest in me too, rest in me too. The ends of earth stretch far and wide, through dark and sea, and open sky, and I am yours, I rest in you. Oh, wondrous love, rest in me too, rest in me too. The lone wild bird in lofty flight is still with you, nor leaves your sight, and I am yours, I rest in you. Oh, wondrous love, rest in me too.
Wow, that was lovely. Thank you for curating that, Ludi. The Reverend Tracy Barrett lives in Winter Springs and considers herself to be a Unitarian Universalist evangelist, sharing the good news of our liberal faith. She begins today with the realization that we cannot serve from an empty vessel, and wonders, after a year of living this global pandemic, how are we doing? How are our own spiritual vessels doing? Reverend Tracy will discuss spiritual practices, why they are important, and suggest ways that we can refill our own wells. You may hear her do a short countdown before she begins her talk. Let's enjoy Reverend Tracy's sermon.
Our hearts are heavy and heartbroken. Our work is great and never ending, and it is so easy to drain ourselves. You cannot serve from an empty vessel. This quote from author Eleanor Brown was drilled into me throughout seminary. However, it's not just ministers who need to learn this important fact. It is something we all, no matter who we are or what we do, need to remember. After this last year, it's natural to be drained. Our hearts are heavy and heartbroken. Our work is great and never ending, and it is so easy to drain ourselves to the point of burnout. How do we prevent that? The answer is simple, although it takes a lot of work. The full quote from Eleanor Brown gives us some insight. She says, "Rest and self-care are so important. When you take time to replenish your spirit It allows you to serve others from the overflow. You cannot serve from an empty vessel. There are 3 parts to Brown's quote: rest, self-care, and replenishing the spirit. Rest is pretty easy to explain, so I'll only touch on that briefly. This isn't laying down while reading the paper or watching the news. This is legitimate resting. Nothing that distracts you from the main purpose of resting. Toss on some Netflix or mindless television or music and just rest. Read a book that makes you happy. The main purpose of resting, legitimate resting, is to rest. It sounds simple, but it does need to be intentional. This can be really hard if you've heard messaging your entire life that you're lazy if you're resting. I encourage you to work through those messages, either with a journal or a therapist, depending on how deeply those messages are entrenched. If there are people in your life who you know struggle with this, the greatest gift you can give them is to encourage them to rest when they need it. It sounds simple, but for those of us who are struggling with that messaging, hearing permission is a blessing. I'll even give you all permission right now. Make sure you take some time to rest this week, to really rest. Self-care is the other stuff we do to take care of ourselves. Eating right, getting enough sleep, doing fun things, taking your medications on time and as directed, spending time with family, spending time with friends, participating in hobbies or sports, etc. So much like resting, I don't feel like I need to go into too much detail here. But I know that this has been hard this year as we've not been able to be with our friends or participate in things outside of our homes as much. But as the vaccines roll out, I will share with you what my colleague, Reverend Deborah Pope Lance, says about self-care. If it doesn't feel even a little self-indulgent, you aren't doing enough. When was the last time you did something for you that felt self-indulgent? This year has been hard on everyone. At this stage in COVID, we've either lost someone or know someone who lost someone to this pandemic. And now, as we see a potential end in sight, we have to build in some time for self-care if you haven't already done so. So let's talk about the last part of Eleanor Brown's list, replenishing the spirit. I find it interesting that her list seems to be in order of what's easiest to what's hardest. Rest is pretty easy. Most of us get at least some sleep every night. And if not, the body will eventually force the issue. Self-care, even when we don't call it that or do it intentionally, is something that we're doing without thinking of it most of the time. Replenishing the spirit, though, that takes a lot more intentionality. So what does it mean? At the start of seminary, we were given a list of spiritual practices to try, and just that, to try. From day one, it would stress that the biggest part of spiritual practice is the second word, practice. It takes doing it on a regular basis. So we were encouraged to experiment with a spiritual practice we had not tried before, just for the first semester. And then we could switch to something else if we wanted to do so. The purpose was to find something that would feed our spirit during the beginning of the journey. Perhaps it would stick with us, but we had permission to set it down if it didn't. So what was the list we received? Well, I'm going to share it with you because I really hope that it will encourage you to take on a new spiritual practice. At the top of the list are the ones you probably expect: prayer and meditation. Any form of prayer or meditation fits into this practice. Now, as a young adult, prayer was my main spiritual practice. At the Bible college I attended, I could often be found in the upstairs chapel, deep in prayer for hours. For me, it was a conversation with someone I had a relationship with, and it still is. My time as a chaplain intern a few years ago found me returning to my roots. I needed a spiritual practice to sustain me in deeper ways than I had found since coming to Unitarian Universalism. And so I began every shift in the chapel, praying for guidance, praying for strength, praying to find ways to share love and peace. I ended most shifts in the chapel, lifting up the families and patients I'd encountered that day. And some shifts, I wandered into the chapel multiple times during the day. The chapel became my well, and I kept returning to it to fill mine. When I served a congregation, I would often wander in the quiet sanctuary during the day, and I'd walk along with chairs, praying for the community, for the country, for the world, for my beloved people. Now, do I think it manifests change? Yeah, but the change is within me. That, for me, is the purpose of prayer. Over this last year, during the time spent at home, I've rediscovered my older form of prayer practice from my time in Bible college. I have a notebook, and within it, I write out my prayers and my thoughts. Sure, it looks a lot like journaling, but there is a conversational quality there. Now, there are various types of prayer and meditation that you can try. They include centering prayer, passage meditation, mindfulness meditation, Tonglen, guided meditation, and Lectio Divina. Centering prayer is, according to Thomas Merton, prayer that is centered entirely on the presence of God. It emphasizes interior silence. It's a form of monastic prayer that, according to Merton, quote, begins not so much with considerations as with a return to the heart, finding one's deepest center and awakening the profound depths of our being. Passage meditation is based on a book by the same name. It involves meditating on a passage in a text and carrying it with you throughout the day. It's similar to the practice of Lectio Divina, which we'll touch on in a moment. Mindfulness meditation is a meditation where the focus is on the breath. It's similar to centering prayer, but the focus is on the breath, not on the silence. And this is one I think many of us here are familiar with. Tonglen is a Tibetan meditation technique taught more recently by Pema Chodron. It involves breathing in the suffering and breathing out joy. It involves taking on the suffering of those in the world and putting ourselves into a position to exchange ourselves for others. Now, guided meditation can be done by someone leading the meditation live via audio or video recording, or even by reading it yourself. And for me, this is the way that makes it easiest for me to meditate. My anxiety makes focusing on silence difficult, and a guided meditation is often how I have to do a meditation practice. And you can find many different guided meditations on YouTube, on apps, and pretty much anywhere these days. Finally, in this section is Lectio Divina. This may be a new thing for you, so I want to take a moment to talk about it. Lectio Divina is Latin for divine reading. It is often used with a sacred text and involves 4 steps: read, meditate, pray, contemplate. In its early history, it was often done with scriptures. Now, however, it can be done with any passage that has meaning to you, a poem, a reading from a special text, or even a quote. All Souls New York City offers a daily email with a quote for use in a type of Lectio Divina practice. The instructions with this email list the steps as read, reflect, set an intention, and contemplate. Now, before you think that this is all there is for spiritual practices, let me tell you, you would be mistaken. Remember, spiritual practices are what feeds your spirit. And for some of us, we need movement to do that. So movement types of spiritual practices are, but are not limited to, yoga, tai chi, dancing, walking meditation, labyrinth, singing, and chanting. Yoga and tai chi are pretty self-explanatory as why they are good spiritual practices. There is a component of being aware of your body and its position in space that can be very grounding. Now, I'm still working on making yoga a practice. It is so easy to skip a day or two, and then it's been a month. But over this last year, I did spend 1 month doing yoga daily, and I definitely saw a difference, not just in my body, but also in my mind and spirit. And since I've been skipping days, I now see a difference of not doing it. My friend and colleague in Texas, the Reverend Erin Walter, will be the first to tell you that dancing is a wonderful spiritual practice. She teaches a weekly Zumba class as part of her ministry, even online during this pandemic. And she had dancing as part of her ordination a few years ago. Now, walking meditation is more my speed, really. This is a form of meditation where instead of sitting still, you are walking slowly and paying attention to those things around you. You're not walking just to get somewhere. It's the journey that's important, not the destination. A beauty walk is also a form of walking meditation. And this is where you walk the area around your home, around your work, around your congregation, around your community. And during this walk, you take notice of things, the wildflowers growing along the road, the condition of sidewalks and how that varies depending on what neighborhood you're in, what kind of buildings and the state of them that they are in every area. It's really great for getting a sense of what goes on in your neighborhoods and how they are or aren't supported. A labyrinth takes walking meditation, adds to it a specific walking pattern. Now, I love labyrinths. The statement I have always heard about them is, the point of a maze is to find its center, and the point of a labyrinth is to find your center. And at first glance, a labyrinth looks so simple, right? It's just walking in circles, going towards the center, coming back out, going closer to the center again, coming back out, and finally making it to the center before you make your way back out the way you came in. But done purposely, though, it can be extremely moving. It reminds you that sometimes you have to walk back and forth to make progress forward. Singing and chanting are both powerful spiritual practices. And I know that in this past year, that is one of the things that many of us have missed, is singing in community. I love listening to chanting because even if I'm not doing it, my breathing slows, my body relaxes, and my mind calms. While I'm not a singer, I know many, and they all say that having that time to sing, to really sing, brings them peace and gives them strength to continue on. And yet, that is still not all. There are spiritual practices that are tied to creativity, journaling, making art, crafting, and making mandalas. There's a practice that many of my friends do called morning pages. And this is sitting down, preferably first thing in the morning, and simply writing whatever comes to your mind, wherever your thoughts take you, until you fill 3 pages without editing or judging. And there are so many ways to make art and be creative that I am not even going to begin to attempt to name them. But that thing, the one you're thinking about that you do sometimes that you know is creative and it makes your heart sing when you do it, yeah, that's a spiritual practice. For a period of time, knitting was my spiritual practice. If I had a project that required just enough focus to keep from screwing up, but not so much that I would get frustrated, I could find myself slipping into a near meditative state. And spinning and weaving also do that for me. And yet there are still more spiritual practices from this list that I want to share with you. And these are worship, gratitude, forgiveness, and keeping Sabbath. Now, worship is a pretty standard kind of spiritual practice. And I know that word can be difficult for some, but remember what it means. It means to consider things of worth. When we come together on Sundays, whether here on Zoom or hopefully back in person at some point, we are collectively considering things of worth. This could mean something different for each person, but the main thing we are all, by virtue of being Unitarian Universalists, that we consider of worth is the covenant of our community. We are held together by that power of covenant. And those who keep gratitude journals do this practice of gratitude in a very intentional way. Forgiveness is exactly what it sounds like. Although please remember, forgiveness is not giving someone a free pass for hurting you. It's releasing the hold they have on you and on your heart. It's not letting them live rent-free in your head anymore. Forgiveness and gratitude are for us, to remind us of what we have and what we will allow within our life. Now, keeping Sabbath is a really big one for me. Ever since the start of seminary, I have kept a Sabbath day. Now, this is not in the same vein as our Jewish friends, and I want to make that part clear. Arvid Straub says this about keeping Sabbath. All it means is that you take one day in the week where you don't do anything you're obligated to do. This is a religious practice. You don't do anything that you're obligated to do. He goes on to say, we keep the Sabbath by picking one day a week, and it doesn't have to be a Sunday, of no working and no chores, no shopping, no maintenance. It's a time to rest, to enjoy family, friends, and loved ones. It's a time for reflection, a time for reading, for good food, playing, praying, and lovemaking. Now, I'm a huge believer in keeping a Sabbath. For me, Fridays are my Sabbath. This is my time, and I hold it close. Very few things break into that. Things like General Assembly, ministerial chapter meetings, sometimes class is scheduled on a Friday. And when that happens, I reschedule my Sabbath. That's how important it is to me. Sometimes my partner's day off lands on my Sabbath, And on those days, we may do something together, but even then, it's something that refills my well. Some weeks that means going for a walk in the woods. Some weeks it means just hanging out in the hammock and chatting. But no matter what, my rules for my Sabbath are no checking work email, no homework, and very little housework. It's a day for me to refill. My Sabbath keeping is intentional, and I can tell when I've been unable to keep my Sabbath. I get cranky, I get frustrated easily, I can't focus on what I need to do the following week. So now that I've shared this list, I want to add an important perspective. During my first year of seminary, a colleague said something to me that helped me immensely. They said, and I'm paraphrasing here, your school will tell you, not necessarily explicitly, that spiritual practices are prayer, meditation, yoga, etc., quiet things. And yes, those are spiritual practices, but they're not all of them. Anything that feeds your soul and that you desperately miss when you don't do it can be a spiritual practice. Only you know your well, and only you knows what fills it. So that leads me to my questions that I'll leave you with, dear ones. What fills your well? What brings you joy? What things do you do that give you strength to face the world one more day? If you are struggling with those questions, then I invite you to take on one of the spiritual practices I mentioned, just to try, to experiment. Susan Manker-Seal, in discussing the various spiritual practices she's used and later abandoned in her life, says, every change in my life has seemed to disrupt my pattern. And each time I've had to find out what fit my new situation. But even though I haven't kept up these practices regularly, I have learned from them, been shaped by them. They are tools, not ends. They help us learn to slow down, to pay attention, to focus, or to empty. They are not definitions of spirituality themselves. They are tools, not ends. If a tool isn't working for you, put it down and try another one. Only you know your well, and only you know what will fill it. You cannot serve from an empty vessel. This world needs us to serve, to heal it, and we can only do that if our wells are full. Come back to the well. Amen. Blessed be, and may it be so.
Thank you, Tracy, for those words of wisdom and insight about spiritual practice. And now we extinguish our chalice, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Our benediction, the words of Romans 12. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds. And that concludes our service this morning. Once again, thank you to the Reverend Tracy Barrett for her sermon, Come Back to the Well.